Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up, Xanthe Ross tells us about the growing appeal of supper clubs.
I was aware then, and something that's still really important to me now, is the whole feeling of a room that I create through a supper club.
Also on the programme, we roll up our sleeves for some wild garlic foraging. Plus, we meet the founder of German-based wine collective Wein Goutte. All that here on The Menu on Monocle Radio. Oftentimes, when people look to start their career in food, they might not want to jump into a restaurant kitchen straight away. One way to try out their style and skills on a smaller and more intimate scale is with supper clubs. Other than being a testing ground for new ideas, these setups are a way for chefs to operate in a homely environment focused on hosting rather than the adrenaline-fueled atmosphere of a restaurant. And for attendees too, it's a chance to connect with new people around a table. Xanthe Ross has mastered the supper club format. She has been running her own since 2019. Now she has written a book to celebrate the recipes she returns to time and again, with a focus on putting vegetables first. I sat down with her in the studio to find out more.
Food was a massive part of my childhood without actually being a big part of my childhood, if that makes sense. My mum's an amazing cook, and actually, as a disclaimer, she tested all my recipes in the book, so she's also a really big part of it, which is really lovely. But food was kind of a really natural part of our childhood. It wasn't spoken about a lot. It was just that we would always all sit down. I'm from a big family. I've got 5 siblings. And so we always were sitting around the table. We had to sit at the table until everyone had finished their food, so it was a very communal moment. I think that food has been in my family as well for a long time, and I think that until I really started my career in food, I just hadn't thought about it as a skill set that I could develop. And I think that when I first started, I think food's really, lots of people have natural instinct with food, but I think you can learn a lot more than you think. And that was definitely the case for me, in that I just liked food, but I wasn't thinking that I could be good at it. I think food takes also a lot of confidence, and you have to learn that. And I really have learned that over the years, that I deserve my place in the kitchen, because I didn't necessarily come from a super, super professional kitchen background. So I've used cookbooks. All the people that I've come across in my career, which a few of them I mention in the book, I've worked hard to absorb as much as I can from. And I've watched videos. So yeah, that's kind of where I've learned.
Well, I think there is a generosity in the approach that you take to teaching others as well, in the sense that you do spell out things that need spelling out, like take time to read a recipe, like from start to finish before you begin, and make prep lists, and don't be afraid to just write everything down, because your brain is going to melt if you try to remember everything, which I really appreciated. You do mention a few places that you have visited in kind of building your career, but there is one place that really sticks out to me and makes me wish I could go, which is Ballymaloe in Ireland. Can you please tell us what the experience of, I suppose, widening your knowledge of cooking was like there, and how did it change you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you say is interesting about the points in the book that I make about setting yourself up as a good cook. I think Ballymaloe taught me a lot of that as well. My kind of initial interest in food was really, and is really, in ingredients, and Ballymaloe is all about ingredients. You're growing the vegetables, you're milking the cows, you're making the bread. And I think that integrity is something that I've carried through up until now and will always carry. It kind of showed me that food is about everything and not just the food. It's about the way you consume it and the way that the people you enjoy it with. And I think that, the classical cooking skills of going to school, I think you can easily learn those skills by going into professional kitchens, if not more, because, the pace at which you're learning in a professional kitchen is much faster. But I think not many places in the world do things with such integrity as Ballymaloe does. And it kind of showed me, it was the beginning of when I moved to Wales for a few years to really get into vegetable growing. And it kind of showed me that was a lifestyle I wanted to live. It wasn't just the cooking. It was like, okay, I want to get to know the vegetables. I want to get to know the soil. And everyone who works there and teaches there is just so passionate about what they do. And you feel amazing. You're eating so much, but all the food you eat and all the food you cook is from the farm. And it really, I think that, the sustainable food world has become really overly saturated. There are so many actually incredible people doing incredible things. And I think Ballymaloe is really one of those places.
We've talked about you growing the vegetables and you cooking, but I suppose there is a hint in this most inviting of book titles, Stay for Supper, which actually just makes me want to say, yes, please. But there is a hint there to, I suppose, the main thing that you have done for years, which is running supper clubs. I want to ask you how much this world you feel has changed since you started, because it is perhaps now not as uncommon as it was when you started. How do you see the world around you, and how has your supper club also evolved over the years?
When I started, I really didn't know how to cook. I mean, it sounds silly, but I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to produce a meal that was talking about ingredients. It was way more about the ingredients than the food or the cooking. I was aware then, and something that's still really important to me now is the whole feeling of a room that I create through a supper club, whether it's like people having a cocktail when they walk in, the tables. I think one thing that's really interesting about it in London is that I really understand that people would like community events. I like to think that that's of equal importance as the food at my supper clubs now. So people come on their own, they make friends there, they hopefully come to the next one with the friends that they made. And I think that that's quite hard to find in London, things that you're doing just for the sake of meeting like-minded people. So I think that that's really shifted. I think that they've just become so much, in my own case as well, they've become so much more elaborate in the production of them. They're still very low maintenance, but I more mean in the kind of social media aspect of how they look and creating your own vision for them. I think that's really important. There is so much on social media now that makes it feel quite viral and similar. And so how do you keep your own philosophy and feel and look of the event outside of that? I had to explain what supper clubs were to people until like 2 years ago. So I think it's really interesting and it's really exciting that so many people, so many young cooks it kind of gives them a way to kind of start experimenting with food that they don't necessarily want to go into a restaurant, or they don't know how to get into a career in food. I think supper clubs are a really good entry level into that. Like, you could do it at your own home for your friends and it can be called a supper club. So I think that it's kind of given the food world a bit more of a chance to get into the food world that feels less scary, I think. So I really love that.
I love that idea of community, because people are gravitating, as you say, to clubs of all sorts of kinds, not just supper, but running and all sorts of other things. But I wonder, how does that reflect in the food that you choose to cook? Obviously, there will be an element of sharing, but what makes a plate something that feels like it fits your philosophy of supper club? And I'm sure is reflected in this book as well.
It's definitely about the vegetables. The book is vegetarian. I'm actually not vegetarian, but I cook vegetarian. It's about the vegetables, and that goes back to the suppliers that I'm using. So I work with really small suppliers. My vegetable supplier is a company called Shrub, and they work with small farmers across the UK. And that's where I start to develop the menu. So I'll look, I mean, seasonality is a really overused term, but I will genuinely look at what's in season on that specific week. So I will start the menu with, say, 5 vegetables, and I'll build the dishes out from that vegetable. And then the pudding will always be a little bit of a fun kind of visual experience. But I think that when I was first cooking, especially when I was first hosting supper clubs, I was more concerned with impressing everyone and showing my capability, whereas now I feel like my style is just really simple, and that's a good thing.
You talked there of seasonality and the perhaps overused nature of the term, but I do think it's really interesting that in the book you also talk about kind of listening to your gut and how seasonality is not just about what's currently in the market, but also what, I suppose, our bodies are sort of geared towards wanting to eat at any specific time, which is not something that I'd actually thought about before, but it's definitely true, because we are kind of little animals who feed on whatever the earth gives us. Also, something else that you say in the book is, I guess, this idea of kind of following your instinct when it comes to cooking for yourself, which I think is so much easier to do when you don't have to worry about the other people who are coming, but you just sort of tune in and think, okay, what do I actually feel like? How important is, in this very aesthetic world that you create, how important is intuitiveness as well? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's really nice. This is why I love this book so much, is because it really reflects the way I cook at home, but you can scale the recipes and make them beautiful and make them sit on a supper club table. It's really important for me. It's kind of the way I really, really eat and cook at home, that as you say, the intuitiveness of, you know, it's seasonality, but it's the fact that you would want to eat a really warm vegetable stew in the winter. Spring, I've always talked about greens and detoxifying. And again, that's not a very nice word, but it's like you're refreshing your body after winter into spring, and you're eating many more greens and lighter food. And in the summer, it's obviously transitioning into salads. And I think maybe the wellness industry has taken over these terms, but they are like intuitive, the word. And I think that it doesn't need to feel like a wellness term. It's just really the way that we've always eaten. I think the way we should continue to eat. And I think that, you know, you can, when you're having people over for supper or you're putting on a supper club, you can kind of assume that the food that they would want to eat is the food that you would want to eat. So if it is a warm, I have my first book event on Monday, and I did gazpacho from the book because it was warm, and you're in a room with lots of people and you kind of want something to cool you down. So I think it's always felt, and I think when I think about the things that I wrote in the book, they're almost also intuitive to me, my ways that I've cooked and eaten. So I'm like, oh yeah, I did write about that. But yeah, it's natural. And I think that hopefully that will just make people think, oh yeah, I've actually kind of always eaten like that. And that's nice to pay a bit more attention to, I guess.
There's another thing that you say in the book, which I really related to, which is this idea that you always had a big appetite because you had to make sure that you sort of got through first so that you could get seconds. How important do you think it is to sort of recognize and embrace like the fact that sometimes we do just have this big appetite and we want to just hoover up everything that's on the table because you want to mop up the sauce with the bread. You want to go that extra step further.
Yeah, I've always been kind of embarrassed by my big appetite because I literally eat double what my friends eat.
You're not alone.
Okay, good. I think that, again, it's that intuition of not eating the amount that you think you should eat and being able to feel hungry and devour a plate of food really quickly. And that's intuition as well. I think because also my job is physical, so I get even more hungry, especially on cooking days. You know, just allowing yourself to follow your instinct with how you're feeling, and obviously mopping everything up with bread. My favourite section in the book is the things on toast one, because bread is, you know, I love baking. I love bread, and any meal with bread is always going to be better.
That was Xanthe Ross speaking to me at Midori House. This is The Menu. After long and dark winters here in London, the return of fresh spring flavours is eagerly anticipated by chefs, home cooks and restaurant goers alike. And over the past few years, one seasonal ingredient has been taking centre stage: wild garlic. Sprouting in shady corners across both city parks and countryside hedgerows, the pungent green plant never really took the spotlight on British menus, but it's been popping up in more and more recipes. Historically, you would need to forage for the leaves in the fields yourself, but for the first time, UK supermarkets have begun stocking it to keep up with growing demand. Monocle's Maisie Ringer explores how London's chefs are showcasing it on their menus and where you can get your hands on the seasonal favourite. She brings us this report.
Perhaps the definitive sign of spring, wild garlic is a staple of the British countryside. Its long green leaves and delicate white flowers blanket woodlands and hedgerows this time of year and are eagerly sought after by chefs for their versatility. Once a niche pursuit, foraging, especially for wild garlic, has gone mainstream, with supermarkets scrambling to stock wild garlic products for the first time. At Waitrose, searches for wild garlic are up 31%, whilst meal kit service HelloFresh has also jumped on the trend, adapting recipes to include the ingredient. But what's behind this spike in popularity? I set out to explore how London's foraging-focused chefs are using wild garlic and whether they've noticed a growing appetite for the seasonal plant. My first stop was Apricity, a Michelin Green Star restaurant championing British produce. I spoke with chef owner and founder of the Cordia Collective, Chantelle Nicholson, to ask whether people really consider where their food comes from.
I don't think it's important enough to people. I don't think people think about it a lot. I really notice, being from New Zealand and coming to the UK, that there is a big disconnect between where food comes from and how it gets on your plate and who's involved in that process. I think for me, I grew up surrounded by growing things. It was just in my face the whole time, and I really understood things like the effect of the weather. My uncle I'd be staying sometimes there, and an alarm would go off, which was the frost alarm, so they'd have to go up and frostfight, like physically go and light fires and fan all of the trees to protect them. So it's like I've experienced it firsthand as to how difficult it is.
A deep respect for the journey from farm to plate is central to Apricity's philosophy, working closely with suppliers to get the best possible ingredients. For Xanthe, the key to good tasting ingredients is seasonality, using produce at its natural peak.
For me, it's that natural rhythm, and food tastes better when it's in a natural rhythm because it hasn't travelled far, it's of the moment. And for me, food is very of the moment, and you've got to enjoy it in that moment. And if it's travelled quite a while to get to you, it means it's some of its goodness, and whether that's its taste, its flavour, its nutrition, it is all diluted from that point onwards. I think there's a lot of people in this country that kind of have that expectation that things are available all year round in the supermarket. The thing with wild garlic, what I love about it, is such a British staple for this time of year, and you can only get it this time of year. So you're forced to eat it in season, and I love that. So you've got to make the most of it while it's there. There is kind of a number of phases with it. You have the actual leaves, then you move on to the flowers, and then you can move on to the little seeds that are left after the flowers, so which can be turned into capers. So there's kind of such a plethora of things that you can use it for, which is so lovely. We're using it in Sussex for our micro bakery and scones, and so we just julienne it and pop it in with the scones, and it's delicious. Here we make oil out of it, which then we can use later in the year as well. We also dehydrate it, so then we can make a powder, so then we can kind of use it as a flavour enhancer across a number of things. We also ferment it, so kind of pack it into jars with a little bit of salt, maybe some ginger in there as well.
So what's driving the trend? Michelin Green Star chef Ivan Tissell-Downs originally used forage ingredients at his former restaurant, Native, for their low cost and creative potential, but emphasises the need to forage responsibly.
I think the sustainable dining and foraging lends itself to a kind of finer end of dining because the ingredients are so scarce. We would get certain berries and blossoms that would only last a day or so, or we had to pick. They had a short season of 2 weeks before the birds would come and eat all the cherries, for example. So you can only serve so many people that ingredient, and then you have to move on and change. There has been a huge increase in the interest of foraging since lockdown, really. I think people had a lot of time on their hands. It's great as long as you know how to forage properly. I was always kind of taught a rule of 3 in foraging, and it's you take a third. If you see a patch of wild garlic, for example, you take a third for yourself, you leave a third in the ground to do its cycle and grow again. But also you leave a third for animals or other people to come and take some as well.
And who taught you to forage?
Who taught me to forage? It was completely self-taught originally, and it started off like probably every single person in this country really that's grown up and picked a blackberry. It was a blackberry, then I took a slowberry, then a rosehip, then a hawthorn, then I found wild plums from a tree that's never produced them ever again. It was 1 year I got wild plums from it. Never came back. So I might have not done the rule of 3 there. I might have picked too many, for example. It's good that it is more popular. People start to begin to know these ingredients because they are, the forgotten flavours of the English countryside, really, like using meadowsweet and woodruff and these amazing ingredients that we can use to replicate vanilla flavours, or Alexander Caesar's Szechuan pepper, for example. So it's great that people are becoming more accustomed to them.
For Ivan, the conversation in the fine dining world has already shifted from sustainability to regeneration, being mindful not just of what we take from the earth, but what we put back. I asked him where he searches for wild garlic and, more importantly, his go-to wild garlic recipe.
The optimal conditions that I have seen for wild garlic is a kind of dark, damp area of woodland, tends to be near a river on the kind of edge, or a small stream. But it pops up in the most random places sometimes. A good alternative is to pick 3-corner garlic, or 3-corner leek, which is an invasive species, so you can pick as much of that as you want. You don't have to follow the rules and freeze for that, and that again grows in similar conditions, so I would recommend people start taking that, and it has really nice flowers as well. And with both of those ingredients, the go-to thing is pesto, and I'm probably sure everyone's sick of hearing pesto. For me, I blanched about 20 grams of wild garlic and about 80 grams of kale in some water, blend that with another 100 mils of olive oil and put that on your pasta, and it's the easiest, quickest, most refreshing, healthy dinner you can get.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Maisie Ringer.
Thanks, Maisie. This is The Menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's Francesca Gilks.
The future of the banana is under threat from climate change, according to new research from Christian Aid. The organization's report shows that almost 2/3 of banana cultivating regions in Latin America and the Caribbean may no longer be suitable to grow the world's favorite fruit by as soon as 2080. This is a result of rising temperatures, extreme weather, and climate-related pests. A Brazilian microbiologist has won the World Food Prize, the equivalent of an Oscar for agriculture. Mariangela Hungria won the accolade for research which has helped Brazil to drastically increase their soybean production by swapping conventional fertilizers for bacteria. The bacteria then help plants' roots naturally produce nitrogen, a vital chemical for healthy crop growth. And robot chefs have begun to appear in South Korean restaurants as part of a push towards greater automation in the service industry. The robots have been implemented to solve a labour shortage problem in the Asian nation, where over 1/4 of the workforce are over 60 years old, and the government plans to increase the number of bot workers to 1 million by 2030. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, Francesca. You're listening to The Menu. And now we're joined by Emily Campo, the co-founder of winemaking project Wein Goutte. After years working as a chef and sommelier across Europe and North America, Campo settled on a small farm in Franken, Germany, where she now tends to vineyards under the Wein Goutte label and produces a lively array of vermouths and ciders. Monocle's Chloe Lake gets an inside look at the work behind the project, as well as finding out which wines Campo is looking forward to drinking from her cellar this year. Chloe started by asking Emily what brought her to Germany in the first place.
That's a bit of a long story, but I moved for love.
That's great.
Yeah, so prior to meeting my husband, I worked as a chef in Paris and New York, and then I took a full-time wine director position in Montreal. So I went back home at Restaurant Candide. I was the wine director there for a total of 7 years. But I was always doing harvest internships, and then I went to Austria for a harvest internship, and that's where I met my husband. And then very quickly things went forward that we kind of wanted to start our project together. So that's how we started. We started our project in Austria, and eventually we wanted to move back to Germany. He's German, so we wanted to go back to Germany.
Right. And you're on a 4-hectare plot now, is that right?
Yeah, 4.2 to be exact.
Oh, okay. It's expanding. In Franken, I believe. And it was, as you say, kind of a small project starting out and now is kind of expanded into this evolving, I guess, winemaking business. So can you tell me a bit more about how you decided to get into that and where you're at now?
Yeah. When we moved from, when we started looking from Austria to move into Germany, we put an ad in kind of a winemaker's newspaper, and we asked that we put it out in the world that we were looking for vineyards that were at least organic, a place to stay, and also a place to grow vegetables. So it was like a big manifesting moment. But this couple reached out to us, and they didn't have any succession, and they were looking for someone to take over. And they were in Franconia, which was the plan B on our list. Plan A didn't work, but it's only plan B, that was pretty exciting. And so it was like an agricultural blind date. So we packed our things in Austria and we just moved during COVID. And we were like, let's give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, we can just move on and do something else and try it somewhere else.
So it sounds like the blind date kind of worked out for the best.
Yes, it did actually. Yes, things are going really well. We are finishing kind of the succession part of the project this summer. So it took 4 years to see if everyone was happy and if we were moving forward with this. And we are. So that's really nice. And we haven't expanded so much. We went from 3.5 hectares to 4.2. So we just signed one plot that was half a hectare. But we really are using what was already there, what they did. We're building on their dream that they're kind of done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so building on that dream, what are the wines that you're producing at the moment? And vermouths as well. I know you're into cider.
Yes.
A bit of everything.
Yes, we do produce a little bit of everything because we believe in using what we have. We're both retired chefs, so we love to we think like cooks, you know what I mean? So we make a few different wines every year, every vintage, usually about 4 wines, even though we have quite a lot of different grape varieties, but we make some blends, and then we make 1 vermouth per vintage and usually 1 cider as well.
Amazing. And kind of on the blends note, I know you've mentioned in the past that you're growing hybrid vineyards, which isn't super common in Europe. So how did you come about that? What are hybrid vineyards, and what are the benefits of that growing style?
So yes, when we arrived there, we were really excited to know that our partner had planted hybrids a long time ago. So our hybrid vineyards are well established. Some of them are over 25 years old. And we were both really excited about this. I'm from Quebec. We grow a lot of hybrids in Quebec, although different ones. The ones in Quebec are bred for climate, and here they are bred more for fungal disease, like to resist to fungal diseases. And so we were like quite excited about this, to work with these varieties that are, quite common in Germany, because Germany has injected a lot of money into hybriding programs after the war, because they just kind of put a lot of money into this. So they developed a lot of hybrids that are of really good quality. Some of them are so that are not. But the ones we have, we're quite happy with it. So we have Johanniter, Muscaris, and Regent. They're all kind of more towards the first generation of hybrid. And then we blend them with other grapes that are more common. We have Sylvaner and Müller-Thurgau and things like this. So we usually assemble them together to make different wines, different blends.
Yeah, sure. So it's not just an environmental thing, I guess. It's also about like the flavors that you're producing and kind of that variety.
So originally our partner planted them because he wanted to reduce the workload.
Sure.
Hybrids need less spraying. They need less attention. Some of our plots haven't been sprayed in 25 years. That's quite miraculous, to be honest. Like, there's not that many vineyards that are able to do that. The ones on the hillside, they really have like the perfect microclimate, so they don't really need spraying. The ones that we have on the flatter vineyard at the bottom of the hill do need maybe 2 or 3 treatments a year. That's probably like 3/4 less than what our other vineyards need. So it is an environmental thing. Also, the hybrids they adapt much better to hydric stress. So like when the vine is like struggling because we don't have that much water, we don't have that much rain, they adapt a lot better to this. So it is an environmental thing, definitely.
Sure.
But it's also,
in addition,
it's also a taste thing.
Sure.
I think hybrids have been discriminated against for such a long time, but like treated the right way. There are no bad grapes, you know what I mean? Like, you just need to give them some love and the attention that they deserve.
No, I agree, absolutely. They get a bad rap, but it's not all bad. As you say, there's so many different advantages to growing like that. Just before you go, I wanted to ask you a quick fire question.
Yes.
It's spring, so what wine is in your fridge or your cellar at the moment, and what would you pair that with?
A wine of mine or a wine from something else?
Any wine at all. You can choose a few if you want. Doesn't have to be one.
Oh, wow. There is so much wine in our cellar because we drink less and less, to be honest. When you're like constantly surrounded by wine, sometimes you don't really want to drink it so much. I mean, I can start with a wine from ours because we just released our 2023 vintage, and we are both quite excited about it. We have a wine it's a white blend, so it's a lot of different grapes. It's called What Time Is Too Late to Go to Bed, and it has 4 grapes, Muscaris, Johanniter, Müller-Thurgau, and Bacchus. So it has quite like a floral, aromatic, like really zingy and zesty palette, which is really fun with a lot of the spring vegetables. A lot of tastes good with the color green. You know what I mean? Like asparagus,
absolutely.
peas,
I know what you mean.
beans, like all of these, and also creamy things and some spiciness as well can like really float above that. So that I would start definitely with that, not to toot our own horn, but I've been drinking a lot of sherry these days. So
that's great.
Emily Campo of Wein Goutte there, speaking to Monocle's Chloe Lake. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune into our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Chiara Rimella. This program was produced by Monica Lillis and our sound engineers were Flynn Simons and Elliot Greenfield. Thanks for listening and until next week.